It happened in a single heartbeat. One moment, the billionaire sat alone in a quiet highway diner, trying to escape the pressure of his world. And the next, the trembling waitress leaned down as if refilling his coffee, her breath shaking, her eyes filled with terror, and whispered words that froze the blood in his veins. She told him he was in danger. She told him not to look back. And then, with a courage he couldn't understand, she told him to pretend she was his wife if he wanted to leave alive. The lights flickered, the air tightened, and the billionaire realized that he wasn't just being warned. He was being saved by a stranger who looked like she had been running from fear her whole life. In that instant, everything changed. A storm was coming, and she was the only shield he had.
The billionaire had never felt fear the way he did in the dim corner of that highway diner, but everything changed the moment the trembling waitress leaned down, her hand brushing the table as if she were refilling his coffee, her breath barely audible against his ear as she murmured a sentence that made his heart jolt inside his chest. She told him he was in danger. She told him not to look behind him. And then she told him something a stranger should never have had any reason to say, that he needed to pretend she was his wife if he wanted to walk out alive. In the span of a single heartbeat, his world shifted from calm, late night solitude to silent catastrophe, and the blood in his veins began to roar like a warning siren. He didn't know her name, he didn't know her story. But her voice trembled with the kind of truth born from terror, and something in her eyes, wet, desperate, pleading, told him that whatever danger she sensed was real. If you believe in kindness, humanity, and second chances, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. He forced himself to breathe normally, even though his pulse hammered with a sharp, metallic panic, and lowered his eyes to the menu as if everything was normal. The diner lights flickered softly, the air humming with the low buzz of refrigerators and the occasional hiss from the kitchen. To anyone watching, it was just a billionaire sitting alone after hours, escaping the noise of the world. But beneath the surface, a storm was twisting into shape. The waitress thin, pale, and exhausted in a way that made her look older than she probably was, moved around him with an urgency masked by practiced calm. Her hand brushed his shoulder lightly, a gesture intimate enough to sell the lie, yet gentle enough to show her fear wasn't for herself alone. When he finally allowed himself a small glance at her, he saw something else too, the look of someone used to surviving, but rarely safe. As she shifted beside him, he noticed her subtly angle her body in front of his, shielding him with the kind of instinct that belonged to someone who had protected others before. He forced his breathing to slow. She reached into the pocket of her apron and slipped him a folded napkin under the guise of cleaning crumbs off the table. Inside it, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 chilling words, "They know you're here." The billionaire's throat dried. He had kept tonight's travel private. No entourage, no security. Just a 40-minute drive to clear his mind after a brutal corporate takeover that put dangerous men on the wrong side of his decisions. He thought no one knew where he was, but someone did, and someone had followed. The waitress circled the diner once more, then returned to stand beside him, as if she belonged there. Her presence became the one small anchor, preventing him from slipping into panic. As she stood close, he noticed faint bruises on her wrist, old, yellowed, like someone had grabbed her too hard too many times. She wasn't just helping him. She wasn't just afraid for him. She was afraid for herself too, and yet she still chose to warn him. The bravest acts often come from the most broken hearts, he thought. The air in the diner shifted, thickening with tension. The bell above the front door chimed softly, and he felt her stiffen beside him. She didn't look. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder in a way that felt rehearsed, almost tender, and whispered to keep his head down. Her fingers trembled. That was when he knew whatever was happening was far bigger than him. A group of men entered. He didn't need to look to feel the weight of their presence. Heavy boots, the scent of cologne too harsh, the unmistakable sound of guns hidden under jackets, his instincts sharpened. These were not petty criminals. These were professionals, and they were here because of him. But then something unexpected happened. One of the men called the waitress's name. Not her nickname, her real name. He felt her freeze, just for a second, before she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes and greeted him in a tone far too casual for the terror she was hiding. The billionaire realized then that she wasn't just helping a stranger. She was caught in the gears of something she had been trying to escape for a long time. Maybe she recognized the men, maybe she owed them something, maybe she had run from them before, but instead of protecting herself, she was protecting him. It stirred something deep inside him, anger for her, admiration, and a fear so sharp it felt personal. She kept up the act, leaning down to brush invisible hair from his forehead, placing a mug in front of him, calling him love, and smiling like a young wife doting on her husband. The men watched, they assessed, they tried to confirm if this was indeed the billionaire they sought, or just another random customer in a late-night diner. She talked fast, not giving them the chance to look too closely. The billionaire realized she was risking everything by tying herself to him. If they decided she was helping him, she would be the first one they silenced. He finally dared to raise his head, just enough to meet the eyes of the man closest to them. There was suspicion there, sharp, calculating, but also doubt. The waitress used that doubt like a shield. She laughed softly and rammed her shoulder lightly against the billionaire's, pretending to scold him for working too late again. The billionaire played along, nodding, forcing a tired smile, pretending to be annoyed and married and safe. It was the worst acting of his life, and yet somehow she made it believable. She was his cover, his protector, his unexpected savior. Eventually, after an agonizing eternity, the men left, though not far. Through the window he could see them lingering outside, smoking, waiting. They hadn't been convinced, not entirely, but her performance had bought him time, minutes, maybe an hour. Time he wouldn't have had without her. When she finally sat beside him, her shoulders slumping, she whispered that they were waiting for him to leave and they would follow. He wasn't safe, neither was she. She told him the men outside were tied to the same people she had grown up fearing, the same people who controlled the small town she had been trying to escape for years. She confessed that their arrival tonight wasn't coincidence. They hadn't followed him directly. They had followed her. And when they realized who he was, they saw an opportunity. She didn't owe him anything, yet she chose to protect him. And in doing so, she had placed herself in even more danger. The billionaire felt something shift inside him. He had spent years building an empire, outthinking ruthless competitors, navigating greed and betrayal. But none of it mattered right now. None of his wealth or status could protect this woman who had risked her life for a stranger. He knew he couldn't walk away and leave her behind. He knew she needed safety as much as he did. He laid out a quiet plan in his mind, one that involved getting both of them out without alerting the men outside, one that depended on her courage and his resolve. As they moved carefully toward the back exit, the waitress kept her voice steady, even though her hands shook. She explained the maze of alleyways behind the diner, the shortcut that led to the lot behind an abandoned gas station. They slipped quietly into the darkness, steps silent, hearts pounding. Her breath came in sharp bursts, and yet every time he faltered, she steadied him. Every time he hesitated, she pulled him forward. It was hard for him to believe that a woman who had nothing, not safety, not power, not freedom, was the one guiding him. But danger has a way of revealing strength. And in her he saw a resilience forged through years of surviving what others would crumble under. They moved through shadows until headlights suddenly ignited behind them. The men had split up. Someone had been watching the back. Panic surged through him, but the waitress grabbed his hand with surprising force and pulled him behind crates and rusted dumpsters until they were hidden again. They ducked, breathless, praying they hadn't been seen. Minutes stretched like hours. Somewhere in the chaos of fear and survival, their hands remained clasped, her grip desperate but warm. For a moment, he wasn't a billionaire and she wasn't a waitress. They were just two people clinging to life and to each other. When the danger finally thinned and they found a sliver of escape, they reached his car and he unlocked it with shaking fingers. But before she could step back into the shadows, he caught her hand. He told her she didn't have to go back. She didn't have to return to the life that bruised her, the people who controlled her, the fear she had carried for years. And for the first time since he had met her, she allowed herself to look hopeful, just a flicker. But it was enough. Enough for him to make a silent promise he would protect her now. Not because she saved him, but because she deserved a life where she no longer had to whisper warnings to strangers in the dark to survive. What followed was a blur of nights spent moving from safe locations, calls to trusted contacts, legal maneuvers, and careful planning. He used his resources not to hide himself, but to free her. And slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night, her life changed. She found safety, she found peace. She found a world where fear didn't dictate her every breath. And in return, she taught him something he didn't know he was missing. A sense of humanity deeper than wealth, a connection more meaningful than power, and the realization that sometimes strangers cross our paths to save us in ways we never expected. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement truly supports our channel and helps us bring more emotional stories to life. Before the ending, comment below. Kindness still exists. In the end, the billionaire realized that the woman who whispered danger into his ear that night didn't just save his life, she gave him a reason to change it. And as they stood together months later, safe, healed, and finally free from the shadows of their pasts, he understood one truth more deeply than anything else. Sometimes a whisper in the dark becomes the light that guides you home.